Pulp Fiction, but maybe all your past work, because it's just such an even from like an Australian perspective, it's such an iconic film that kind of like just kind of like screams, "This is America" type thing. So I'm wondering if like even when you're at the table writing it, whether you thought that would turn into the iconic work it did, or whether you thought anything would come of it.
Pulp Fiction, working on Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
No, when we worked on Pulp Fiction, we were. I mean, first of all, we were like hired by a studio. So, on one hand, yes,
Okay.
it was a big difference. Quentin at that time had just done Reservoir Dogs, and so he was like kind of an indie. People were very interested in him. People were interested in me. People were interested at that time in anybody in indie film who was doing something kind of a little. I mean, indie film was emerging, largely because of home video and DVD as a kind of viable revenue stream for, like I said, they come to you. You don't go to them.
Yeah.
It's like not like you break in, you just do it, and then suddenly they show up. And Reservoir Dogs actually made less money than Leprechaun.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the Warwick Davis movie.
Yeah.
And that movie was like a bona fide hit in the United States. In Europe, on the other hand, people knew who Reservoir. They didn't differentiate back then. Like a big American movie and a small American movie. It was just an American movie that would show up. And so in Europe, it was like a big, like it was crazy.
Yeah.
Like people didn't.
It did amazingly at the festivals.
It did really amazing, and so he had a lot of opportunities, and he went back to Pulp Fiction, which is a project we had long talked about doing as a film with like a bunch of short films that we would put together with various filmmakers, and wanted to do it himself, and so we got hired by TriStar to develop the screenplay based on what Quentin wanted to do next, and but Pulp Fiction. I mean. Again, for us, it was huge. It was like making $100 million movie. But back then, Pulp Fiction was an $8 million movie. I mean, Reservoir Dogs cost 1.3, I think, around there, in 1993 dollars. And Pulp Fiction cost $8, in whatever it was, $1994,
yeah,
whatever year that was, and so it's it was a huge amount to us. Like it made a big difference. Like suddenly the production was huge, but really in the grand scheme of things, it was still a small film. I mean, it was a small, hip, cool movie. When Bruce Willis attached himself to it, it took it to another level.
Yeah, so even with the amazing cast, it wasn't apparent that it was going to turn into this.
No, I remember one interview Bruce Willis did on MTV where they were asking him, "What are you doing next?" It was like, after some Die Hard movie or something like that. And he was kind of trying to explain to them that he was doing a small film. And he looked sheepish about it, and he was trying to he was kind of throwing out Quentin's name. Nobody really knew. I mean, people in tight circles knew who he was.
Yeah.
It was there was an art house crowd who was sort of, the same people who knew who John Woo was.
Yeah.
In those days, or knew John Woo's work before he came to Hollywood. There was a lot of excitement among those people, but mainstream didn't know who he was. And so here's Bruce Willis, who's like the mainstream guy, and he's describing, what he's going to do next. And I remember him being like a little, he's got Quentin Tarantino. Like he didn't really know yet how to frame it because there was no framework yet for that kind of mainstream indie experience. And
didn't TriStar say it was the worst script they'd had handed to them?
I mean, yes, in a general way, there was a great amount of disappointment in the script when we turned it in.
Do you find that surprising retrospectively?
I mean, Mike Medavoy, who was running TriStar at the time, I think found it surprising, retroactively. He was one of the few people who approached me afterwards. And he was like, I was wrong. And I love Mike. I think he's a brilliant guy. He's actually made some of my very favorite movies of all time. I think the guy's a freaking genius.
Yeah.
One of the best producers ever, or like one of the best studio heads ever. Orion was one of the great companies, and his choices were some of the best. And just when the script came in, he was like, look, it was super violent, it was long, and it was long, and it was violent, and the violence was like super described, and the humor may have been encoded more into it. It's like more difficult for someone to extrapolate like what it means, and then plus you're reading it, and then maybe it's one of your weekend reads, and you've got like 6 scripts to read, and one of them's by Jonathan Demme, and the other one's by Terrence Malick, and and you've got this Quentin Tarantino. Like you don't know what it is, and like you're going through it, and nothing makes sense, and like I don't know what his first impression was, but it happens to people, and so there was like a kind of tide in the room of
apprehension.
Well, just turnaround. It was that was sort of it was safer probably just to put it into turnaround.
Yeah.
And then Harvey and Bob came along and they got it, and they swept in and gave Quentin the support he needed.
Yeah.
And
the rest is history.
Yeah, we have Pulp Fiction, and along the way, it helped to have the machinery kind of pushing it. I mean, there was the machinery of Hollywood. There was this real understanding of, that there's something kind of new and exciting happening in cinema, and that home video is allowing this to happen. That this is the home video generation. Yeah. Just like, we've since had sort of an internet generation of influence in visual storytelling, and and how to monetize creative storytelling. Yeah. That was the one back then. And so as people realized that, there was a great amount of support, from agents, and so like it was almost like I suppose destined to happen, that there would be this kind of groundswell for that kind of cinema at that time. But it wouldn't have happened without the support of the business, and the realization of, hey guys, there's money to be made here, and it built Miramax as a studio at that time. I mean, the success of that film, I kind of figured the movie would do halfway well. We always kept our budgets low, and that movie, for what was going on in it, was made for like a really good price. And that kind of fit the formula. If you make something that's like, good and kind of delivers and makes people feel something, and, and you do it, for a relatively cheap price, and then it has the support and backing of the machinery of the business. I mean, you can really, that's what we have to thank for, I don't know, the explosion of cinema in the 90s.
Finally, you've come back.
I should also say, I'm putting it all on Pulp Fiction, but I should really like, kind of also point to Sex, Lies, and Videotape.
Yeah, okay.
And, the big influencer, at least for really, I think I can say for both of us, for a lot of people, was also Spike Lee at that time.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Who was out of nowhere, just grabbing a camera and making it, and just full energy, and that was huge. And so, and also there were other movies doing similar storytelling techniques coming out simultaneously to Pulp Fiction. Jim Jarmusch did Mystery Train at that time, which was multiple storylines. I mean, people never talk about that film, but it was a huge influence on Pulp Fiction. You've got 3 storylines; they're all interconnected. There's a gunshot that kind of connects them all, so you can kind of set your time, within each story based on the gunshot that happens in the in the background, and so you can use so it's like a fascinating little film. There was also Krzysztof Kieslowski's 3 Colors movies that came out around then: Red, White, and Blue, or Blue, Rouge, and Blanc. and each of those movies is connected. You can see the actresses and players from one film inside of the other, and they're all these kind of interconnected movies. And so it was kind of an idea whose time was coming, the structure of the film, but it was, maybe, I don't know.
The bullet shots, I always want to ask, the bullet shots that, the miracle bullet shots that miss Samuel L. Jackson in that film, how did that idea come about? Because when my dad first showed me Pulp Fiction, I think I was like 12 years old or something.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Whenever I
Jesus.
saw it, like, even like obviously being super young, it's still like it jumped out as being, you know what I mean? Like, because it's again, like, was that thing like, well, how did they miss? It's kind of like, and then like the next time it's 12-year-old me was like, well, how did they miss? Like, they were right there. Like, where did that, like, that idea feels like it's something like, it's just such a novel idea that not many people would think about that.
I actually wrote that specific scene. I wrote that for True Romance, actually.
Wow.
That was
okay.
the scene with Drexel, and in Drexel's apartment, and there was this whole moment in True Romance that you don't see in the movie, obviously, because those scenes were cut out
Yeah.
and moved into Pulp Fiction. And there's a whole scene within it with Drexel and the bullets and the
Yeah.
knife hitting, and the gun going off in the car and blowing off Marvin's head.
Yeah.
All of that was in, the whole thing about, flock of seagulls, and all of that was for True Romance.
Were you worried about the violence in the film?
No,
Not at all.
no, not then.
Yeah.
No, not then. I mean, now it's like I'm a different person now, I suppose.
Yeah.
But no, I wasn't really. I mean, I don't know if I was worried about it.
Yeah.
There was a huge discussion at the time about violence in cinema, and I think I made some statement on a BBC special at one point that I'm almost a little ashamed of, because it just got misinterpreted, but it also, I got thrown to the wolves a little bit over it, and it was I said something like, "Look, I'm not a moralist. It's not my job to like lay morals onto everything. It's not what I do. I'm not trying to like, be a moralist."
Yeah.
And David Putnam, who is like one of my heroes, and I actually feel really bad about it, because I think after Mike Medavoy that he might be my favorite studio executive of all time, and maybe Bill Mechanic shortly after that. Like they're all in contention. It's all very close. These are all really super brilliant guys. But David Putnam, he basically picked me out of like a documentary full of people like saying volatile stuff, and basically said that kid should be taken out and shot for what he's just said about because it's careless. And I get what he's saying. I kind of understand what he's saying, but I mean, he made one of my favorite anti-violent films of all time. He made a number of movies that are my favorite anti-violent films, and I'm actually like against violence. I mean, the difference between Quentin and I think, is that, and this was always the case, is that Quentin he loves the cinematic device of revenge in a movie. Revenge is one of the things in a film that it's been around since early cinema, and it will be around forever. It's one of the most exciting devices for to push a story along, is a revenge plot. I kind of like I'm big on forgiveness, so
So is that a dispute? Like when you were
yes and no. It's like everything is a dispute. When you're writing and you're creating and you're working together, every conversation you have is I wouldn't say maybe dispute is the wrong term, but every conversation is a creative dialogue that you have to discuss motivations of people and what's more important for somebody, and is revenge more important, or is forgiveness more important? Is the better quality of humanity more important, or is the more salacious quality of humanity more important? And it always depends on the tale that you're telling. For me, The Revenant and oh my God, what's the one on